Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Hazmat and Tank Car Storage, brought to you by the Shortline Safety Institute and the American Shortline and Regional Railroad Association. My name is Sabrina Weiss. I'm the Vice President of Education and Business Development for the ASL-RRA. Before we begin, I want to let everyone know that we are recording this webinar and will make the recording available to participants for a limited period of time in case you want to go back and review anything discussed today. To ensure quality audio for the recording, all attendees are on mute and you will only be able to hear our presenters speaking. If you have questions during the presentation, you may type them into the questions bar on your screen and we will read through all the submitted questions at the end of the webinar. Today we're going to try something a little different. So for those of you who have attended our webinars in the past, you get to be guinea pigs today. We are going to attempt to do a live polling on a few of the questions during the presentation. Now, unfortunately, we haven't had a chance to practice this live with attendees, so you are all officially guinea pigs. So what we're going to do right now is I am going to put a test question up on your screens, and you should have an opportunity to answer yes, no, or I don't know to the question, do you like trains? And I see that some people are already voting, so clearly this is working for some of you. I'll just give it a couple minutes for everybody to jump in and vote. I'm a little disappointed that we've actually got some no answers in here, but it takes all kinds for the trains, I guess. Okay, so it looks like this works. Thank you all for walking through this exercise with us. I am going to go ahead. For those of you who haven't voted, you should be able to see on your control panel, you should be able to see a tab that's called Polls. And if you open up that tab, that's where you should be able to vote or answer yes, no, or I don't know to the question. So I'm going to close that for now. You'll see that pop up again later in the presentation. And I'm sharing the results so everyone can see the poll results on their screen there. So you've now officially been test subjects for our first live polling for a webinar. Thank you very much. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce today's presenter, Ken Holgard. Mr. Holgard is a hazmat specialist for the Federal Railroad Administration in Billings, Montana. He supervises 7 federal hazmat inspectors and 5 state hazmat inspectors, and his territory includes North and South Dakota, Montana, Wyoming, Idaho, Oregon, Washington, and Alaska. Ken has been with the FRA 24 years, and prior to the FRA, he was a hazmat inspector for the Association of American Railroads Bureau of Explosives, and he also spent 14 years with Burlington Northern Railroad as a brakeman and a conductor. So I'm going to go, Ken is here with me now, and I'm going to turn it over to him to get things started. So Ken, welcome.
Well, thank you very much. I would like to thank the Safety Institute for inviting me to talk on this subject. It is a hot subject. I get calls every week on it. Short line railroads and people looking to store tank cars because the price of the crude oil right now is fairly low, and so they're banking on the possibility of buying low and selling high. And it's also a way for short line railroads to get some extra income by leasing out their track. What we hope to do today is give you an idea what the DOT regulations are with regard to storing hazmat in tank cars. We'll define whether or not cars are considered in transportation and what that actually means. We'll look at some of the storage requirements when cars are being stored on private tracks. We'll ask you a few hypothetical questions just to see if you're following along, and we'll try and use this poll system, and you, the guinea pigs, will get a chance to take part in that. We'll cover some of the regulations that deal with tank car storage and why there are regulations for them. And then at the end of the presentation, which should take about a half hour, we'll open it up for any questions that you might have. Okay. First of all, the Federal Railroad Administration is given authority to regulate short line railroads, class 1 railroads, all railroads, when things are in transportation. And specifically when we're talking about hazardous materials, we need to know when that starts and when that ends. And we'll,
Ken, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but folks are putting in questions asking if you can speak up a little bit. And I know you're on a cell phone, so if there's any way we can get that a little closer to you, folks might be able to hear a little better.
Okay, we'll give that a try.
Great, thanks.
Oh, okay. We'll also talk what the difference is between private track and carrier track and why that's important. We'll look at different terms like storage incidental to movement, constructive placement, and we'll look at the regulations that deal with this. Sabrina and I have a little trouble moving the slides. There we go. Okay, we'll start with what is meant by when we say something is in transportation. The regulations, the Hazmat regulations, we'll see that abbreviation for HMR, is only pertinent when hazardous materials are in transportation. They don't apply except for stuff dealing with security plans when they may be not in transportation but are in storage. Security plans also fall under regulations managed by the TSA, Transportation Safety Administration. Okay. The term transportation itself entails not only the movement of the hazardous materials, but also the loading, the unloading, and storage incidental to that movement. It starts when the carrier comes in to pick up the rail car and goes through the whole time until it's delivered to the consignee. There is one exception to this rule, and like I said, Hazmat has an exception for that. And that has to do with the term private track. Because people want to store cars loaded with hazmat, they have to have it someplace that it's outside the general transportation system, and that would be on a private track. If it's not on private track, it doesn't matter what the shipping paper says as the final destination. It would still be in transportation, and all the regulations would apply. Now there's two types track, there is the track that is owned by the railroad, and then there is track that is leased by the railroad, leased to a private organization that has to meet two criteria to be defined as a private track. The first is that there is a written lease, and then the second part of the private track definition is that no control is entailed by any other outfit other than the leasing. The leasing has total control over all operations on that track. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that the track would have to be locked out or flagged out or anything. It could be, but it is not defined in the regulations that it must be. A private track is considered a private track only if the railroad that is leasing the track has no control or responsibility for the trackage or the cars that are on that track. It's totally under the control of the lessee. If the railroad takes and uses part of that track to, say, set cars over while they're classifying a train or something, and then at that point it would not be considered a private track, and then the regulations would all kick in. And we're looking at things like placards on cars, shipping papers, and the whole works will come back into effect at that point.
Hey, Ken, can you try and speak up a little bit again? I think folks are having a little trouble hearing you still.
Okay, I've got the microphone right next to my mouth, so we'll give it a shot. Okay, here's that first hypothetical question. In a document entitled Private Track Agreement, a railroad leases a track in its yard to Shipper B for Shipper B's exclusive use. The railroad, on occasion, also uses part of the leased track to store cars ready for delivery to another entity. Is this track considered a private track? Go ahead and answer your questions right now in this poll. If you think it's a private track, answer yes. If not, answer no. And give it a shot.
Just so folks know, I know that we're having a little bit of trouble with the volume on here. It is because Ken is on a cell phone. He does not have a landline hooked up in his office right now. So, Ken, if you can just keep the microphone right next to you, that'll be great. Looks like we've got a majority of people who have voted, so I'm going to close the poll, and then I will share it. So you should see that we've got 11% of people said answered yes, and 89% answered no. So there you go, Ken.
Okay. Looks like most of you think it is no, and probably you understood. I'm not able to move to the next slide there, Sabrina.
There you go. You got it there?
No.
I'm wondering if you've got a delay on your computer too. So the answer to question 1 should be up on the screen now.
I do not have that.
Okay, why don't you click in the slide, Ken, and see if that gives you a chance to regain control of the PowerPoint.
It's not working.
Okay, give us just a minute, folks. We're having technical difficulties. So I'm going back. So we've got the answer to question 1 up on the screen, and then we've got a hypothetical question 2. No one else is seeing this move? Hold on 1 second. Ken, let me know if you see the change on your screen.
Will do.
Well, you're still not seeing the screen change?
No, I'm not.
Okay. Well, I've got people on the line saying they're not seeing it either. Hold on 1 second. Let me go back to the polls. Like I said, we're going to close the poll now. Let's see if that helps. Ken, try it one more time.
Okay, I can see the answer now to number 1.
All right. This is what happens when we try new technology live. So now I know what to do. Go ahead.
Okay, the answer to that question is no, and the reason being is yes, they do have the private track agreement, the lease, but they do not entail in actual practice that the railroad is not operating on that track. They're using it for, they have still some control over it, so then it would not be considered a private track. So it doesn't meet both criteria in order to be a private track. Okay, we'll try and move on to the next slide. Go on to hypothetical question number 2. In a document titled Private Track Agreement, a railroad leases to a shipper storage space for 50 cars on tracks X, Y, and Z in its yard. Currently, only that shipper's cars are located on tracks X, Y, and Z. Is this a private track? Go ahead and answer your questions right now. Yes, if you think it is a private track, or no.
Okay, I think people are getting the hang of this because the questions are rolling in pretty quickly here. I'll give you just a few more seconds to answer. All right, so we're going to close that and we're going to show the results of the poll. 55% answered yes, 39% answered no, and 7% answered I don't know. So Ken, you go ahead and take it back over.
Okay, it looks like we're kind of divided on this one. The answer is no. It go back one there.
Here, I'll do it for you. There you go.
Okay. The reason why it didn't meet the definition of private track is the lease did not actually specify that it is for exclusive use of that leasee. Yes, they probably currently don't use it for any other cars, but it needs to be spelled out in the lease that it is for the exclusive use of the leasee. Okay, we'll go on to question number 3. In an untitled document, a railroad leases track A in its yard to shipper B for its exclusive use. The railroad never accesses that track or uses that track unless it is moving cars exclusively for shipper B. Is this a private track?
Okay, we've got answers rolling in. Folks, just a little bit longer here. Okay, looks like most people have voted if they've had a chance, so I'm going to close it, and then here are the results. 73% answered yes, this is private track, 18% answered no, and 9% answered I don't know. There you go, Ken.
Okay, all right. And the answer is yes, it is. It doesn't actually have to say that it has to be a private track agreement, but it spelled out that it was for the exclusive use of that leasee. In actual practice, showed that it was only for the leasee, and the railroad had no control over that section of track. Okay, one more. We'll try question number 4. Okay, Sam, the president of a short line railroad, verbally agrees to lease to a shipper a portion of track in his railroad yard for storage of shipper's hazmat cars. Sam agrees that he will not let anyone else use that particular track, and that his railroad will not access that track in any circumstance. In fact, the railroad never accesses that track unless moving cars to or from the shipper. Is this a private track?
Okay, this is our last one, so I've just launched it. We'll give folks a few minutes, a few seconds to respond here. Okay. I'm going to close it in just a minute. All right, looks like the majority of people have voted. So the answers to this, we've got 27% answered yes, 71% answered no, and 2% answered I don't know. So Ken, take it away.
Okay. Well, the answer to our question is no. The lease must be in writing. It cannot be just a verbal agreement. It has to be in writing that it was for the exclusive use of that leasee. Okay, moving on. If cars are being stored on what is going to be defined as a private track, at that point the cars would be out of transportation. The regulations would not apply. The FRA would have no jurisdiction in there. They could still go and do inspections on the cars, but they couldn't take any defects or anything on cars that are not in transportation. That would be considered what we call storage incidental to movement, is defined as a package that is set out, say, someplace between where it's picked up and the final destination as it's shown on a shipping paper. It is still considered in transportation, and as storage incidental to movement. And we still have the security requirements that go along even if cars are in storage. What this all comes down to is what we call our 48-hour rule. And this is brought about so that the railroads don't sit on cars, that they would promptly move hazardous materials from point A to point B and get them there as fast as they can. There are several exceptions to this. Sometimes you'll have a lease agreement with a shipper that you only service them on 2 or 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or Monday and Thursday, and they would not be able to get to those cars in 48 hours. But there is that exception, also an exception for weekends and holidays. And all this regulation, the storage requirements and everything only pertain to loaded tank cars. They do not apply to the residue cars because it is not considered a revenue move. Okay. There are some requirements like for Class 2 materials, your flammable gases, your poison gases, and your flammable liquids like crude oil, ethanol, can't be held at any point subject to forwarding orders, unless it's actually going to a private track. You can't just load the cars, send them to a location waiting for disposition as to where they're going. They would have to be directed from the initial point to a consignee somewhere. Constructive placement is when a car reaches its destination, but it can't actually be delivered to the consignee because the trackage is full. Their storage tanks are full or whatever. So the railroad can hold them cars in their yard prior to delivery to the consignee, but they would still be considered in transportation until it actually gets to that final destination. Regulation requires that the storage on a certain track be designated by the carrier for stuff that like these Class 2 materials, for example, liquefied petroleum gas, that the tank cars must have interior pipes for liquid and gas discharge valves. And those are check valves that just about all your pressure cars do have these check valves inside their pipes. These other 17310 deals with the cylinder tank cars, where they take and offload these cylinders and put them onto a flatbed highway cargo truck and move them that way. So the only way they can do that on railroad carrier trackage is if they have hoisting materials there to take those storage, those cylinders off, and it has to be done in immediately upon arrival at that yard. You could sit there and store it for several days before while they line up the truck. So the hazardous materials don't really say what that designation means, but it is implied that it must be in writing as to where those storage tracks are. Those cars that are considered constructively placed, like I said, they're still in transportation, and that would also meet the definition of storage incidental to movement. The security plan would still be in effect. All the marking requirements, the placarding requirements, emergency response information has to be present for all those cars, because these cars are still considered in transportation. All that would apply. Once the car actually reaches a private track, according to the definition, and then at that point, the hazardous material regulations don't apply. Like we say, railroads can store these cars. As long as they have the exclusive use lease agreement, they can go ahead and store any materials. Your crude oil, your ethanol are the ones that are being stored quite a bit nowadays. And the railroads are charging anywhere from, say, $3 a car up to over $50 a car per day. And when you're looking at 500 cars or 1,000 cars, it would be pretty lucrative for the short line railroads. There we go. PHMSA, which is the Pipeline Hazardous Material Safety Administration, they're the organization that actually writes the regulations and interprets these. They say that the unloading part of this on a transloading facility does not apply. And the reason being is when a transloading operation is considered moving the material from one bulk package into another bulk package for the furtherance of transportation. So the hazardous material is actually still in the process of moving to its final destination. So the transloading operation would still be considered in transportation, and all the regulations would apply. Okay, I think that's all we've got. We'd be ready to answer any questions that you might have.
Okay.
Back over to Sabrina.
Great. So we have had a few questions come in as you've been talking here. So I'll just remind folks that if you'd like to submit any questions for Ken to answer, you can go ahead and type them into the questions bar on your screen, and I'm going to go ahead and read through those. So, Ken, the first question we have here is, what is the impact of an RMP on loaded hazardous storage?
RMP. I'm not familiar with that term.
Let's see if I've got further clarification down here from the question asker. Well, whoever asked that question, if you can provide a little more context, we'll go back to that one. So another question I have is, what if they aren't loaded but placarded as hazmat? I guess the question is, does that change the way that you handle these?
If they're not placarded or are placarded?
If they are placarded but they are not loaded.
Okay, I think you're talking about residue cars or empty cars. The storage regulations only apply to loaded tank cars that would be placarded.
Okay. Let's see.
You could still store residue tank cars, but there's no requirement for having a private track lease agreement for those cars.
Okay. All right, going back to the first question, RMP meant a risk management plan from the EPA. So let me go back and repeat the question for you. Hold on just one second here. I got to go back and find it. So what is the impact of a risk management plan on loaded hazardous storage? And if you don't have an answer for that one, we can always submit it to folks here.
I would not be familiar with a risk management plan. If that entails like an emergency response plan, that would probably fall under other regulations and not the DOT. Department of Transportation only applies to transportation and not actually storage. So
okay.
You'll have to ask someone else on that. So.
Okay, well, I'm going to save a copy of all these questions, and I'll put them to some folks here like J.R. Gellner or Joe Strang to see if they can tease out some answers for you on ones that Ken may not be as familiar with. Okay, another question we have here is, on the private track designation, is the security plan for private track to be provided from the lessee to the railroad? Does the railroad add anything to its security plan?
It would be between the railroad and the lessee to come up with one. It could be the railroad already has a emergency response plan or a security plan for their tracks within their yard, or it could be a section of track that is a siding out in the middle of nowhere. Then the shipper may have to come up with a security plan, but somebody would be required to. It doesn't designate one or the other. So.
Okay. Another question we have here regarding empty tank cars en route to rail storage or cleaning facility. Are empty tank cars considered hazmat shipments while en route to a tank car railroad storage or tank car rail cleaning location, inasmuch as there could be some residual material inside the tank cars from previous loaded hazmat movements? For example, empty tank cars that previously handled crude oil.
Yes, they would fall under the hazardous material regulations, and they would be required to be moved in the same manner as if the car was loaded, with placards, with shipping papers. Everything would still apply, whether it's a load or a residue tank car.
Okay, this next question may be related to this one, and it may be the same. Well, I'll leave it to you to decide. Do you foresee storage residue cars being regulated the same as loaded?
As far as storage goes, there's no requirements for having a private track lease agreement for residue cars. The railroads can take and move those cars. They could store 2 or 3 shippers on the same track. There's no requirements for residue tank cars. So it only applies to loaded tank cars with hazmat.
Okay. Let's see. I've got another question here. I'm trying to sort of wade through some of these because I think you've answered some of them in other comments. When storing empty hazmat cars under a storage agreement on railroad tracks without exclusive track use, are regulations such as placard condition in effect?
Yes, they would, because they are still considered in transportation. So whether or not it is loaded or empty, there still would be requirements to have shipping papers for those cars, to designate where the final destination is. Placards would have to be in good shape. Everything would apply, even though they're not on a track that is designated as private track. They are considered still in transportation.
Okay. It looks like we've got one more question here. Storage track locations for empty tank cars. Do you recommend storing empty tank cars on tracks adjacent to actively used tracks, such as next to tracks containing motor vehicles being loaded or unloaded, or adjacent to tracks that are being used to load or unload various transload commodities?
For residue tank cars, it really doesn't matter where you store them. Next to movement of any other on-track equipment, of course, entails some risk, but there's no requirement that they be stored away from that type of equipment.
Okay. I think I've got a few other questions that are coming in, but I think they need to be taken offline and handled directly, because I'm not sure that you can answer them necessarily, Ken, or if they need to be answered by somebody here at the association. So if you had questions that weren't answered live by Ken, like I said, I'll send this list over to J.R. Gellner here. Feel free to follow up with him for clarification. The other thing I would recommend is if folks have follow-up questions or want to reach out to Ken directly, this final slide here on your screen does have Ken's email address, so you can contact him with any follow-up questions. If that's all for our questions today, I think we just want to thank everyone for joining us, and take a look at our website for additional webinars that are scheduled. We have another one tomorrow on with the with PHMSA, and then we have several that are coming online over the coming week. So thank you again, everyone, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you all.